Hello and welcome to this instalment in our series of interviews with the policymakers, movers, shakers and promise breakers at the heart of our government. While our guest, Joan Ryan, has been out of action for 5 years, voted out by the Conservative Nick Dubois MP at the last general election, she was a member of the last Labour government representing the constituency of Enfield North for 13 years and held a number of prominent posts, once Special Representative to Cyprus and Vice Chair of the Labour Party. Joan is now the prospective parliamentary candidate, basically the person who wants to get into Parliament, for Enfield North for the general election on May the 7th. As Enfield North is a swing seat, having had a very low majority for the Conservatives at 2010 of 1,692 voters, Mrs Ryan has a very high chance of winning the seat and was in fact predicted in a recent Independent article to win. So Joan Ryan, how are you feeling about these election prospects? Do you think people of Enfield will vote for you?
Well, I very much hope they will. I mean, I think you should never, ever take the electorate for granted. The voters choose you, not you them, and I think you have to remember that. It feels very positive. We do a lot of activity on the doorstep. We're out at least 6 sessions a week. A session lasts about 2 hours. So we talk to a lot of people, and a lot of people are finding life very hard. We're really struggling, and I find a lot of people feel very let down by the Tory-led coalition. So it does feel positive, but you know, we've got about 76 days. I think we've got to just keep working very hard, keep communicating with the voters, and not take them for granted. That's really important. And be absolutely honest with the voters as well. You really have to have a proper conversation with voters and it's really, you know, about respect and being straight with people. And I think people are fed up with politicians who are not.
So how would you review Nick Dubois' term as MP for Enfield North?
Well, I don't think that's really for me to do. I think that is for the voters of Enfield North to do, and they will make that decision on May the 7th. But I think Enfield North has suffered in the last 5 years. We've lost our A&E department and our maternity unit at our hospital, Chase Farm Hospital, despite the Prime Minister and Nick Dubois standing outside of that hospital and promising that if people supported them, they would make sure we kept our A&E and maternity unit. Now, I think that's seriously misleading the voter, and aside from that, our other hospitals now, Barnet and North Mid, where people from Enfield North have to go, are under huge pressure because of the loss of the services at Chase Farm. And my fear is that we are losing bits of our hospital all of the time. And the plans for the new building, which is much smaller than any district general hospital.
About that as well, yeah.
Yeah, it's a huge issue in Enfield, it really is. And amongst young people, you know, I see that, you know, despite what everybody might think, that you'd want to say, you know, what's your top issue as a young person, and people think you're going to say, you know, tuition fees or minimum wage for young people, or, you know, housing, all of which are very important issues. Actually, the opinion polls, my opinion, say that majority of young people put NHS and healthcare as their top issue. And I'm not surprised about that at all. Because I don't think young people are just about themselves, you know. This is a huge thing for everybody. So our hospital is being, I think, is under threat.
Okay.
And I think we've got to try and do everything we can to protect it for the future. The new building, they're like prefabricated pods that will be craned in. So they could be craned out again. And North Mid and Barnet aren't built from prefabricated pods. So why is that what we're getting? And it is small, very small. So, you know, I think there's a danger that that hospital will be closed by stealth, bit by bit by bit. And that really worries me and is a very, very serious issue for the people of Enfield. And that's why, for us, it's an absolute priority to fight, to protect Chase Farm and to fight to meet the healthcare needs of the people of Enfield, whatever age they are.
We agree with you there where you say young people do care about similar issues that affect the country and to the NHS and also the living wage and online voting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you, as we see the NHS, say you think the NHS in Enfield is being shut down bit by bit, do you think this could be part of the Conservatives' economic plan? Because they have said, can you ensure like Labour will be young people will be in a better position in the next 5 years economically by Labour's plans? Because some of these Conservative cuts are due to the long-term economic plan marked out by David Cameron.
Mm. But that long-term economic plan hasn't worked. They've borrowed 219 billion more than they said they would. 90 billion this year. Yeah, and they talk about getting the deficit down, but borrowing is still going up. And if you talk to people out there on the doorstep, they're not feeling the benefits of this so-called economic recovery. Young people are nearly £1,700 a year worse off than they were in 2010. That means you'd have to work an extra month every year to earn what you would have earned in 2010. So I don't see this economic recovery because, it's tax cuts for millionaires. There's no denying that. That's what happened. Whilst everybody else saw a VAT increase and everybody else saw wages held down, so the gap between wages and prices has grown and grown till average families are over £600 a year worse off. Now, in the last week they've been saying, oh, that's narrowed. Slightly, yes, it has narrowed, but it's nowhere near closing the gap. And for most ordinary working families, they are finding life a struggle. And they say to me, there is a cost of living crisis. Lots of families who 5 years ago would have been thinking, now we'll plan a summer break with our children, we'll have a holiday. They can't think about that now. They can't afford that. Lots of families are worrying about their bills, about putting food on the table.
So what do you
These
think?
are real issues for people. I don't think that economic recovery has been fair. It's good for very rich people. People are earning over £150,000 a year. And I've not got anything against rich people. We'd all like to be rich, wouldn't we? That would be really nice. But I just think it has to be fair. They have to pay their fair share. And everybody has to benefit in a fair way from any kind of economic growth. And that's not happening. The gap between rich and poor has got bigger.
We agree with you on the statistics, but what do you think Labour will do to try and reduce this in the next government?
Well, we've made it clear that we will pay off the deficit. Nobody's suggesting it doesn't have to be, the deficit and the debt doesn't have to be paid. It does. But I think these austerity measures of this government pushed us back to recession after we'd already come out of recession. Remember, under the last Labour government, we were actually out of recession and we'd had growth for a few quarters before the Tory-led coalition came in. With their measures, they pushed us back into recession. What Labour has made clear is, yes, it will still be tough, there will still be tough decisions to be made, and we will make them. However, we've made a commitment to increase the national minimum wage to £8 an hour. We've made a commitment to absolutely support a living wage. We've made a commitment to increase the free childcare hours from 15 hours to 25. Childcare is a huge cost and it's risen exponentially under the Conservatives. And most families now, to manage any kind of a decent standard of living, two parents often need to work. So having good nursery provision, 25 hours free nursery care a week, very, very important. We've made it absolutely clear that we will take action on rented properties, that we will get rid of the letting agents' fees. This affects young people hugely as well. I think housing is a major issue for young people.
The housing crisis is one thing that a lot of our readers are concerned about. Do you think Labour plans are really will tackle the housing crisis, both in London and in the country as a whole?
Yes, I do, but I think it's a very big problem. We've got the lowest level of house building since the 1920s. I mean, that is completely unacceptable, and we've got a growing population. And what people in Enfield say to me is that because there's such a shortage of supply, rents have gone up. They're young people, and they're getting married, want to start a family, or setting up home together. They can't afford to live in Enfield, near where their parents or their grandparents are. So this is breaking up that extended family network where we can help and support each other. And I think family and extended family, they are the building blocks of community and society. So I think the housing problem causes huge damage. Not only is it very difficult for young people to leave home, many more are now living at home or going back home after university because they can't afford to get into the housing market. You've got to be earning something like £70,000 a year to buy a house, just a normal home in Enfield. That's quite a lot of money. A lot of people, that's way above the average wage. It puts housing out of reach. So what Labour has said is we will build 200,000 homes a year for the 5 years. That won't completely solve the problem, but that's what we know can be done and is affordable, and we need a good mix of housing, affordable housing, and if we increase the supply, it will stop this incredible spiral that we've seen of prices that put ordinary family housing out of reach of ordinary families. We've also said we'll get rid of these letting agent fees, and we want to have a situation where you're not in this revolving door of tenancies, and you can look to a longer tenancy up to 3 years. I think these measures are really important for people. And if you can't have a secure roof over your head, how can you manage your life? How can you hold down a stable job? How can you make sure your family is safe and secure? It really is most important.
On the house building issue, there hasn't been much house building over the past 5 years. Statistics prove that. But the quality of houses and the price of houses that are being built are also a general problem in London specifically, where there's a lot of high-rise and a lot of properties targeted at the higher end of the market. Could Labour do anything to curtail this or to promote more affordable housing in these sort of developments?
Yeah, and what Labour wants to do and has said is they want to work much more closely with local authorities and give local authorities much more say in having houses built where we need them, rather than having them where the developer thinks they're going to make the most money. And we want to see an increase in affordable housing, because the clue is in the word, isn't it? Affordable. It's what people on the normal income, average wages can afford. That's we've seen a drop in the amount of affordable houses. Enfield Council, Enfield Labour Council, they've been really good. They're actually one of the few councils in the country that are building council houses. So there's some very innovative schemes around as well that people can look at.
Okay. Well, back to you now. Since leaving Parliament 5 years ago, you've been working a lot of human rights work, part of the Global Tamil Forum, and also you're a charity patron for the Riders for Health, the international healthcare charity. What experience you think you have gained that you think would aid you in politics if you were to win on May 7th?
Well, I think human rights is, just a crucial area for all of us to be focused on and to address. And I do believe that the human rights of one person are breached, then that affects us all, and we should all be engaged in defending our human rights. And the Tamil people, were massacred. I believe it was a genocide, what happened in 2009 in Sri Lanka. When the official figure often put on is that 40,000 Tamils died, I think it was probably quite a lot higher than that. And the United Nations Human Rights Council has said there has to be a proper independent investigation. But the government of Sri Lanka and the former president, President Rajapaksa, prevented that from happening. I hope, because there's now been a change of president in Sri Lanka, and that change has occurred because the Tamils have very bravely all went to vote, despite terrible threat to their safety, even their lives, that they took part in the election. They went to vote and they voted out Rajapaksa. Have a new president there, and I hope he is going to be more honest about what happened in Sri Lanka and about ensuring the Tamils are properly represented, have a proper voice, that their rights and their land rights are protected, that we see an end to the militarisation that has occurred in the north and east of the country, of the violence and the terrible sexual violence against the population. And they're very serious problems. And I think it's very hard to move forward and rebuild communities and countries unless you have proper accountability for what happened, particularly in the situation of genocide. So we are looking to Sri Lanka and the new regime there to ensure that they address these issues properly. I know it's difficult, it's always difficult, but there is no peace without justice. So, we have a big Tamil community living particularly in London, not particularly in Enfield North, actually, and that wasn't why I was engaged in it. I was engaged in it because Tamil community did come to see me from other parts of London and said, nobody hardly is paying any attention, and this is happening in our homeland, and people are dying. Will you help? And I just thought, although that doesn't specifically affect Enfield North, it affects all people, and human rights is something we all have a responsibility for. And I just couldn't turn away from that. And so that's how I got involved. I raised it extensively in Parliament with others. We persuaded David Miliband, the Foreign Secretary, to go to Sri Lanka. And then after I lost my seat and stopped being a Member of Parliament, the Global Tamil Forum approached me and said would I work for them to set up their secretariat here in London. And I worked with them on a consultancy basis, and I've maintained contact with them and other Tamil organisations. There's also British Tamil Forum, TGTE. There's and then there's the the young people are very well organised in the Tamil community as well, which is heartening for the future.
So this work seems extremely important to you, as you have just said. So why did you come back to politics? Was the sound of the division bell ringing all along, echoing back in your mind?
Well, it's really about my community. I live here in Enfield, and I love Enfield. It's very important to me. My family live here, children and grandchildren. I wouldn't want to do this anywhere else but Enfield. And I don't view it as a career. I was a teacher for many years, and that was my career. I think of being a Member of Parliament for Enfield North as a vocation. It is about serving your community, but like any work of that nature, you get such a lot out of it. It's fantastic. And people used to say to me, being an MP, it must be a very miserable job, because you must see all the bad things, people come to you with all their problems, but it's not a bit like that, because first of all, you know, you get to help people, which is a great feeling. But secondly, you also see all the fantastic things that are happening, all the voluntary organisations, all the people who help other people, all the great work in schools, all the great work in workplaces. We've got apprentices and people working really hard, the wealth creators, all the small businesses who are really committed to making their business work and serving the people of Enfield. You actually see all the fantastic side of life and all the positives. So it's I think it is a bit of an addictive job in that sense. And if you care about your community, then doing a job like this, you know, it's the best job in the world, being a Member of Parliament. And that's why I want to come back, because I believe in Enfield. I believe that people need a strong voice. I believe that people of Enfield need a champion for them and for their services so that we meet their needs.
Okay. Do you think young people are interested in politics? Because a lot of MPs we've spoken to agree that young people have views, but they're not sure if they're interested in politics. Labour seems to have a lead with young people, a 15% lead amongst 17 to 22-year-olds. How do you think that is and why?
I'm very pleased that we have got that lead. I know actually that young people are interested in politics. And I know it because I taught politics at A-level for many years, and sociology, which obviously includes politics. And the students were always terrifically engaged in all aspects of politics. For some time I taught European politics, and you know, you might get people who think, oh my God, that must be so boring. Not at all. It's absolutely fascinating, and the students were completely engaged with it. So the idea that they're not interested in politics, and politics is after all just life, everything is politics at the end of the day, might be with a small p, but politics has a massive influence on everybody's life. And there's no question in my mind that young people are interested, understand why politics matters. So the question then is, what's going on that this gap exists, that, you know, less than half young people vote, or roughly around half.
Only, I think 51.8%.
Yeah. It used to be higher. There used to be a higher, you know, percentage of young people voting. So it is dipping, and I think that says there's something wrong with the way we do politics. So it's very easy to say, oh, you know, it's up to them, isn't it? And they can't be bothered, and well, that's nonsense. It's up to us, actually. We need to engage young people more. We need to reach out, and we need to think about how we do politics. I think that also, you know, we need to look at things like online participation. Labour has made it clear that they will pilot some online voting participation.
We recently went to
investigate
the Digital Democracy Commission, where that was one of the recommendations at the end of the launch. Do you think these will be seen more in Parliament in the next 5 years in terms of debates and actual action? Because the mood we've seen is maybe a bit apprehensive towards these kind of changes.
I hope so. You know, I think Labour are absolutely committed to engaging young people and widening their participation, increasing their participation in politics. I worry that some of the measures that are being taken actually suppress voter involvement. So the new individual registration, we've seen 1 million people fall off the register, and a very large percentage of those are young people. So we have to look carefully. Yes, voting must be secure, but we've never had a major problem in this country. So I think the Tory-led government has taken a sledgehammer to crack a nut, and in the process we've seen 1 million people fall off the register. That's really not acceptable we need to find better ways. We need to be exploring online voting, and we need to be a little bit braver about that. We shouldn't be hanging on to ways of doing things just because we've always done them that way. I'm really pleased that Labour is doing its Young Person's Manifesto and engaging people and young people. And I also think that Labour's commitment, and we've made an absolute policy, manifesto commitment to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote. I think that's the right thing to do. All the evidence shows if you can get people to vote the first time, the likelihood is they'll carry on voting.
So does that mean mandatory first-time voting?
It doesn't mandatory. You mean like compulsory voting? No. At the moment, what it means is you'll have the same voting rights at 16 that you currently have at 18.
But do you think that
mandatory is something different?
Yeah. Do you think that Labour would introduce mandatory first-time voting to get young people interested in politics, as well as having votes to 16 to really engage them?
The honest answer to that is I don't know. I think that's a live debate in the Labour Party. I'm very interested in compulsory voting, in that it's not compulsory voting, it's compulsory attendance, and I think we should look more at that. I know people are often uneasy about something being made, something you have to do by, and it's compulsion. But I don't think we should not have the debate, because you can get to the polling station and you can spoil the ballot paper. You can, you can have options to put that you don't want to vote for any of the people on the ballot paper. It could actually show how people feel about what's being put before them. So it could actually be very positive. And I also think that, I think in this country, we've had a culture of viewing voting as a kind of privilege. And I think that's because of the way we achieved the universal franchise. It was a privilege
Before.
of the upper classes and landowners. They were the only people who got to vote. They were the only people in Parliament. Then gradually, over hundreds of years, the franchise was widened, till in the late 20s, women finally universally got the vote. That's not very long ago. And obviously not too long before that, working men.